Tonight we make no apology for bringing you an image that is almost impossible to stomach. A picture we wouldn't normally show on television, but one that's garnered huge public response around the world today. At 6 o'clock this morning at a Turkish tourist resort, a Kurdish toddler, just 3 years old, was washed up on a beach. His lifeless body showing the brutally, tragically human side to this refugee crisis. Aylan Kurdi had been put on a lifeboat with his 5-year-old brother, who also drowned, part of a group trying to cross a narrow stretch of water that would bring them to Greece to a new life their parents believed of safety. The pictures of that tiny child being carried from the beach by a Turkish policeman have humanised a story that's become too big, too scary for Europe to know how to really tackle. Virgil Keane is in Bodrum in Turkey, where the boy was found. He sent us his thoughts.
Every night, people will attempt to cross this narrow stretch of water between Turkey and the Greek island of Kos over there. It's a very short distance, about 16 kilometres. A strong swimmer would make it there. And a tragedy like that, which was witnessed this morning on this beach, isn't going to change that. You get the feeling that there is this unstoppable surge driven by human desperation. Now, I've been watching the story of refugees from the Syrian war since it began more than 4 years ago. I saw the first of them coming across the Jordanian border. What struck me then and in the years since was the feeling that countries in this region, like Jordan, like Lebanon, like Turkey, felt themselves overburdened, and that sooner or later people were going to look at their options in those countries, particularly in Lebanon, for example, and decide that it was time to go to Europe. And particularly now with the arrival of Islamic State, IS, and the savage fighting that has been taking place in many parts of Syria, there is this new movement of people driven by, in their minds, the promise of a better life across there in Europe. As I say, it isn't going to stop, and the scramble that's now taking place in European capitals to come up with a solution needs to happen quickly.
Virgil Keane in Bodrum. Well, up till now, our legislators have been oddly silent on this issue. We've repeatedly asked the Home Office for an interview on the migrant crisis, but without success. But today, before that picture emerged, the Prime Minister confirmed Britain was not preparing to receive more refugees.
Well, we have taken a number of genuine asylum seekers from Syrian refugee camps, and we keep that under review. But we think the most important thing is to try to bring peace and stability to that part of the world. I don't think there is an answer that can be achieved simply by taking more and more refugees.
So where do the British people stand on that issue of asylum? Is the sense of responsibility becoming more powerful than the fear of opening Britain's borders? Yesterday, we tried the pulse in Germany, a country of 80 million, which has said it will open its doors to up to 800,000 migrants. So is there a correct response or number here in Britain? Secunda Kamani has been to Sheffield.
Sheffield has seen very different waves of migration, with people coming for very different reasons. It has a history of welcoming refugees, becoming the first city of sanctuary in Britain 10 years ago. So if anywhere's likely to embrace more refugees, you might think it's here. This local MP says Britain should do more.
Well, I certainly think we should be taking more refugees. It's nonsense for David Cameron to be saying we need a European solution and then refuse to take part in it.
How does that message go down with the public? At this pub, as you'd expect perhaps, the issues divide opinion.
It's obviously hard for the people that are there, but what I actually think about it is that a lot of the people, they are in desperate need of help, but a lot of people as well, they're just trying to jump on the bandwagon. They're just coming over they are coming to make a better life for themselves, but at our expense.
We use the phrase swarms. We use, they're just, illegal refugees. No, these are people.
I'm going to France anyway, and I'm taking down some waterproofs and some underwear and some toiletries and things like that. It's a drop in the ocean, but it represents the fact that loads of us want to do something. And when we see the pictures of people drowning in the Mediterranean, we want to help.
The point being that of the size of this island, we're talking about geographical area, is 5 times less than Germany. And so, for obvious reasons of space, this island can only take so many people.
So, Alan, I've really got to disagree with you on that, because it's only 1% of the British Isles that is actually developed upon. We actually do have an awful lot of space. Look at the situation in Calais. OK, so we've got 3,000 people there, not 300,000, not 300 million, 3,000 people. Don't you think our country could take that? Well, I certainly do. I would take a migrant, I would take a refugee in my house.
There's got to be a fairer system, so we get the right people who need the help. And it's like you say, it's not just people coming over here to get the benefits of being in this country. And then you see them 6 months down the line and they're driving round in BMWs.
Sheffield was home to the first refugees brought to Britain under the UN resettlement programme a decade ago. But with budget cuts and social tensions around other forms of migration, are attitudes changing? Or is this just the latest in an age-old, never-ending debate?
So Kunnakamani in Sheffield there. Well, Europe has had a shared history of offering sanctuary to the homeless. But is that true for our future? Are we prepared to open our doors, or is there sense in what the government says that taking more refugees is simply not the answer? Joining me now is the former Development Secretary, Andrew Mitchell, and the UN Special Representative for International Migration, Peter Sutherland. Welcome to you both. Thanks for coming in. Peter Sutherland, you saw that image today. I don't know if it crystallised anything for you, but is your sense that this country is doing enough?
I think that this country can do more. The only way to solve this problem is by a united European response, and that means sharing responsibility for appalling suffering. This is a humanitarian crisis that Europe has not experienced in our time, of a dimension which demands a common response. And at the moment, it is certainly true to say that a number of countries are massively bearing the burden of this. Sweden, Germany, Italy, France, there are a number of countries that are taking significantly more by way of refugees per million people population on relative terms. And I think that part of the solution has to be a European common response, and that the idea of quotas or sharing this is a good one.
Wouldn't you feel more proud if Peter Sutherland had named Britain in those countries sharing that burden?
Well, the important thing is that the burden should be shared across Europe. And although Britain is not taking a large number of refugees, we are providing an immense amount of humanitarian support, both in Syria and to the people who've often under gunfire come over the border into the surrounding countries. Were Britain not providing that support, there would be yet more hundreds of thousands of people coming out of that part of the world towards Europe. So Britain is playing an enormously important part. I think it would be fair to say that in terms of support for those who've come out of Syria and who are in the camps in the surrounding countries, Britain has done more than the whole of the rest of the European Union put together in terms of financial support. So let's be clear that Britain is sharing the burden, though we take our share in a slightly different way from Germany and from Sweden.
Peter Sutherland, it's not about the numbers coming in then?
Well, first of all, let me answer that. There are all sorts of arguments about who's giving most. There are arguments about the EU budget in regard to development, which the British position has been negative about. I'm not going to get involved in that. The real issue here is people who are suffering. And no amount of talk about what support can or should be given in development aid overcomes the fact that we are suffering enormous deaths in the Mediterranean and enormous numbers of migrants flooding across Europe, who, most of whom are refugees. That is, people who are escaping from persecution.
Let's just deal with some of those numbers. The tens of thousands in the Mediterranean drowned, the 3,000 at Calais, the 3,000 that we know arrive at Budapest every day. Do you hear those numbers and think...
Of course, and we all grieve at the catastrophe that has overtaken Syria and the Middle East. But let us be clear, Britain is making an immense contribution. It's not, Peter, about, development aid. It's about the hard cash that Britain has put into the camps, into humanitarian resources, helping the hundreds of thousands of people who, thanks to British aid, are alive and being supported in those camps. If we hadn't done that, those people too would have been crossing the Mediterranean and coming in a leaky boat in the hands of the modern equivalent of the slave trader to a European shore. Now,
well, they are doing that, though.
But there will be hundreds and thousands more, but for the British work in the Middle East.
So is the argument that you cannot just encourage more people to leave the countries that they should be closest to?
My argument is that hundreds of thousands of people are escaping persecution. This is a humanitarian crisis and they have to be handled. And that is the issue for us tonight. Who is going to handle them, and are we going to share out the responsibility? The huge numbers that arrive in Italy and Greece.
OK, so share out the responsibility means what sort of number? If Germany, with a population of 80 million and a bigger landmass, is taking 800,000, is there a figure for the UK?
That's not the answer. I mean, the answer is...
But I'm just asking Peter Sutherland if you think that there is a correlation between the landmass or the number of people and the number we should be taking.
There has to be a figure, but that figure has to be based on a number of considerations which the European Commission has said should be taken into account. Population, unemployment levels, GDP per capita. And that has to be the basis of a fair allocation of responsibility across borders, so we can all fairly say that Europe is sharing in a solution. Otherwise, we're going to divide.
And you know, Andrew Mitchell, as International Development Secretary, that every time we miss a horror, whether it's Rwanda, whether it's Srebrenica, we stand and look back and we say, never forget and never again. What if this is one of those moments?
Well, let us be in no doubt at all that Britain is bearing its fair share of the burden, for the reasons which I have said. And let us also remember that many of these people
But do you not think the Prime Minister or his Cabinet will look back and say, we got this wrong? We should have just said this was a crisis moment and we had to give those people asylum.
If errors have been made, they have been made by the international community in not dealing with the causes of this crisis, which is the catastrophe that has overtaken Syria. We are dealing now with the symptoms of this, these poor, desperate people fleeing from bloodshed and conflict towards Europe. And Britain is making its contribution in the way that I have described. What Europe needs to do is to ensure that we have proper reception facilities in Greece and in Italy, where all those who are coming through can be sheltered, they can be fed, they can receive the medicine they need, and they can be processed. And that will have the benefit not only of ensuring that they're looked after, but also of sending a signal back to the countries from which they come.
Presumably,
they won't necessarily be able to stay here.
I have been in some of the camps in Italy. I know what they're doing in Italy. They are trying to deal with a huge influx across the Mediterranean. We have to share that burden.
But when you say share, where does that stop? Do we take the 3,000 in Calais today and then the 3,000 in Calais tomorrow?
Where it stops is when the crisis stops. But as long as we have people who are escaping from persecution, who are dying in their thousands, we save them and we don't get into a figures game. This is a humanitarian crisis where they have to be saved and they have to be given the opportunity to live. And that has to be shared.
Is this a moment of moral obligation, quite simply?
Britain is acquitting its moral obligations correctly in the hundreds of thousands of people who have come out of Syria, come out of this war zone, and who, thanks to British aid and support, are being fed and sheltered and looked after today. Most of the people who are coming across the sea and who are coming out of Syria into these camps, they don't want to recreate Syria in Europe. They want to go back to their homes from which they've come. And that is why the whole international community, all parts of it, needs to tackle the cause of all of this, which is in Syria. We are today dealing with these dreadful symptoms which you have described.
Thank you. Thank you both very much indeed. Thank you for coming in. Well, a little earlier today, Italy declared it would step up border controls temporarily on the Brenner Pass to Austria in response to a request by Germany. Now, Italian authorities believe increased controls over the coming few days would give the German state of Bavaria more time to deal with an influx of migrants, although they stressed they would not be suspending the Schengen Accord, which allows free, documented movement between EU countries. Well, joining me now is the Italian ambassador to London, Pasquale Terracciano. Thank you very much for coming in, Pasquale Terracciano. And many are coming precisely because they know that Germany has said there is a welcome of sorts, that its doors are open. Is Germany right to say that?
Well, I think they are right to say this is a huge crisis, and it requests a generous response. But to tackle this crisis, this is not enough. We need a common approach. We need a European policy for asylum, European policy for border management, for repatriation of those migrants who do not qualify for asylum. I don't think that with this difference of approaches in Europe, we will go very far. All sort of beggar thy neighbor policies won't lead us very far. So we need a new approach. We have to write again the Dublin regulations written 25 years ago.
But it's interesting because the French say that for years Rome has flouted precisely that Dublin Convention by allowing migrants to head off to other countries without being fingerprinted, and it's now coming back to roost.
No, well, you have to consider that last year only we had 170,000 people arriving on our shores, and this year, as of today, we had 117,000. So probably at the end of the year it will be 200,000. There is no local police system that can cope with these numbers. So it's inevitable that the system is not working perfectly. So but solidarity goes together. But solidarity and responsibility should go together.
Well, so just cut down, if you like, or clarify. What does it mean to share the burden now? What would you practically like to see happen?
Well, the request for asylum should be a request for asylum in Europe, because these people arrive in Italy or Greece simply because this is the border, southern border of Europe. So you should process their request with European rules and then assign to different countries according to different parameters.
A mandatory assignment? A mandatory quota?
Well, yes, mandatory quota. Hopefully, I think because all this is about European values, it should be something that different countries accept voluntarily.
And if a country refused to accept it, what would you say? Would they
I would
lose
say that
rights,
responsibility, you can't ask responsibility without offering solidarity. You can't ask Italy to be the prison warden of Europe, simply just to keep these people, identify them and keep them locked, because other countries do not want to share the burden.
You heard that debate with my last two speakers. Who do you think is right there? Is Britain doing enough? Is the Prime Minister right that we shouldn't accept more?
Well, I don't want to single out any specific country. I think the way out is a European policy which is shared by all member countries. Of course, you can do more in one field, a bit maybe less in another field.
But you're the ambassador to Britain. You must have a sense of how this country is dealing with the crisis. What is your gut sense?
My gut sense is that many countries could do more in addressing this crisis, but I don't want to pass any judgment on any specific country.
And a lot of talk has been around Schengen, whether it's still sustainable. Do you think Europe can no longer function without borders?
Well, I think Schengen was a great achievement for Europe, and it's wrong to say that Schengen is part of the problem or has a pull factor. I think that if we had a European management of our borders, if we had a European policy to repatriate those, because there is a lot of confusion between genuine asylum seekers fleeing crisis, war, and economic migrants. So you have to sort it out, and you have to have a European policy for both, for asylum seekers, for economic refugees.
Pasquale Terracciano, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.